Great. So without further ado, you guys, it's all yours. So
Th Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present as part of this retail event. Uh, we'll be going through something related, but the different, like I'll not be showing you the POS and what investments Microsoft has made. There were great sessions, prior sessions I was listening into, and great investments Microsoft has made into e-commerce and uh, the commerce engine and POS. Uh, However, I'll be talking about if you didn't want to go that route, and there I will talk about why and how you can still move forward with your F&O implementation, at least, and how tackle it in the different phases and make it successful. So uh, today I'm going to be presenting with my colleague, Saket. We recently went through the implementation for a customer, and we'll talk more about the customer's background. And they just went live in month of June, and now we got a little bit breather to put this together. So we'll share what we did. Myself as so I'm Yogesh Kasat. I'm one of the principals at Real Dynamics, and I've been very lucky to be part of Elite Group from Microsoft for Fast Track Recognized Architect. A lot of my customers uh, have been part of the Fast Track programs, and it's a great program from Microsoft to make the project successful and providing the support partner needs. And the way Microsoft is investing and uh, making new things available in the product, it's definitely exciting and sometimes overwhelming. So this fast track engagement on the projects does help a lot. Uh, I should update the picture on right hand side. It's 2019, and I was also no part of this group for 2020 as well. So I'm part of it this year as well. I have my contact information here. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter, and my email is out here as well. Okay, I'm one of the public author of Microsoft Dynamics Implementation Guide. That's one of the thing which I realized when I left the previous company where I was lead for whole delivery operation. One of the theme was how do you make the project successful over and over again? And a lot of times with Dynamics growing so fast, onboarding people from say coming from SAP or different backgrounds needed some extra help. And as part of that process, I put together with my other colleagues and authors, put together the book on implementation process. And if you're going through the implementation for first time, I highly recommend going through the book and learning things before you learn them painfully. Okay. I have my colleague Saket here. Saket.
Hello. Hi, my name is Saket. I am also one of the co-founder of Real Dynamics. Um, I'm mostly in a technical front. I have about 10 years of experience with Microsoft Dynamics stack and about 16 years of experience with Microsoft technology itself. Um, I have done a good amount of implementation with Yogesh. I had opportunity of doing at least 5 full lifecycle implementation of Dynamics FNO. Not FNO, FNO is part of it, but before that AX 2012 and 2009. And mostly concentrating on development like kind of customizations, integrations, managing of an environment, and above and all after that stabilizing and performing the performance improvements, making sure your systems are behaving the way it should be. So that's my like small introduction.
Thanks, Saket. Thanks for joining today.
Thank
And
you.
He's my partner in crime for a lot of projects when we do things. So a little bit about Real Dynamics. We are based out of here in California, and really a startup. We've been in business for more than 5 years now, and helping customers on their Dynamics F&O journey. Everybody comes with a lot of consulting background from different organizations, starting from uh, Microsoft Consulting, and have been in field and done it. So that's about Real Dynamics. And one of the recent ISV solution that we published was on commissions optimizer. That's something we felt the need. A lot of customers were looking for. How do we do the commissions right in Dynamics in terms of commissionable cost and inventory cost, and tying those together? Uh, it's out there in App Source. Okay. Okay, let's get into today's agenda. So we'll talk about the background here, why we uh, went crazy and built so many integrations, why Microsoft already supports this. And we definitely had a lot of those questions asked early on by folks at even Microsoft. Why are you going crazy and building so many integrations to do this? And I will talk about what functional architecture we have in place, and what are the integration tools, techniques we used. And this is where I'll take my colleague Saket's help to talk about some of the different technologies we used. And then we'll talk a little bit from implementation, validation, and we'll leave you some key learnings we had from the implementation, and we'll get into Q&A. Okay. So just talking about the background here. So customer already had implemented best in class warehouse system. So they have warehousing system that was implemented like 3 years ago. They built modern POS system, which was built by in-house team and was in process of being rolled out. So they were kind of halfway there. So some of the stores were on the POS, and then some were. So they had taken the approach of like one store at a time, and then moving the store, because they were going from like transition, this business transformation, after a very long time. So there was people side of it. There was training and business processes, and then also inventory counting, and even to some degree layout changes in the retail location. So with all of that, they wanted to make sure they took the time. And then last piece of the journey was to replace the backbone ERP part. So POS, when I mean they implemented POS, it also included their website, and it was very well integrated with their warehousing system, EDI, and other order entry platforms. Now it was all flowing from POS into ERP solution. And ERP was really looking at financials, inventory costing, and purchasing planning. And those were really key functions that were missing in there, or on rest of the systems implementation they had done recently, like warehousing and POS was doing good at what it was designed for, but ERP was needed to support all the financials, inventory costing. And that's where they started the selection process. We looked at the overall customer. We proposed a couple of options. Let's just get rid of warehouse and POS, and then let's replace that with F&O. That was one option. And the another one was integrate the existing POS system, which they had already invested in, and warehousing system that they had invested in and was working for them, and integrate all of that with F&O. Of course, either route, there was going to be some trade-off. Either you spend the time in replacing the systems, or spend the time to build the integration. And of course, we collectively chose the route to integrate. If we had pushed for, hey, let's do whole POS and everything in Dynamics, we might have been kicked out of the pre-sale cycle itself, because that would have been very, very large initiative for them. and redoing a lot of stuff that they had just done and was working. So little bit, so it's just we have different systems, those are all integrated. And okay, so now let's get into functional architecture of this solution. So when we looked at this, we were like, okay, now that we know uh, this is the direction we're going, of course everybody, all stakeholders committed, and we were uh, committing in a way that now we are not going to bring in, oh, if we went with POS, this is how it will work. And we were like, okay, now we are going with this path. Let's look at how this path will work. And that's where we looked at these are the features within Dynamics. Uh, if you look at overall, and Microsoft changes this so often, if they announce something last 1 week, I may not have it here. So apologies if I missed anything. But in general, we looked at whole thing and then said, okay, what do we want to keep or what do we want to utilize on this? And that's where we said these are the areas where we think Dynamics is going to add a lot of value for the customer. For example, uh, product management area, then financials, all the financials, financial reporting, backend processes, uh, create and collections area, and then good portion of purchasing in terms of planning, demand forecasting with Azure machine learning, um, and creating the purchase orders based on the planning, and then collaborating with the vendors and so on. So this is what we said we'll utilize the Dynamics for. One of the biggest part from inventory standpoint was inventory cost, because costing is really one of the reason why we were chosen in comparison to another ERP solution that they were considering. And they really like the costing different, the way weighted average and uh, impact of changes to the cost even after things may not have done in right order. For example, PO gets received but doesn't really get received in ERP, but then it gets shipped, and now later on a PO is received or invoiced with different cost, and the way Dynamics still make sure that all the cost gets pushed back to all those sales transaction, that definitely was a very impressive thing for them. That was a really manual process in their previous system. Okay, so with this, then we put together very simple architecture. Let's say our key thing was anything we were going to have was going to be one master. So for example, I'm going to like different buckets, how we categorize things. So for example, sales tax calculation, like calculating sales tax by contacting sales tax software. They are using Avalara. So all of that was done by POS directly. Credit card integration, we didn't do any of that in Dynamics. So everything you see here is POS and to some degree warehousing. Uh, when I say POS, it's kind of meant both POS and warehouse for this in this context, because for us there was only one system to integrate. They had good middleware which we integrated with. So inventory reservation, all of that stayed in other systems. So we didn't do the inventory reservation within Dynamics. The next bucket was what is mastered in POS but needs to be sent to Dynamics. So this is where, say, for example, sales orders, sales invoices, those were coming into POS first and then pushed to Dynamics. Same thing with customer payments. Uh, they were coming in POS, but not really, as you see, different color here, gray. It is not mastered in POS, but it is initiated in POS, but it's going to Dynamics from here. And same thing for a lot of other areas you see here. Oh, inventory adjustment, inventory, lot serial level, uh, all of those quantity wise POS is the master. And was syncing it with Dynamics. We're not doing any inventory adjustments directly in Dynamics. It all has to come through POS. Okay. Uh, then transfer order chart, transfer order and changes to transfer order, that was also something coming from POS. And then credit card funding report. So uh, credit card transactions and funding report. This is really one of the key area which we utilize from their POS side. So they had all the integrations and um, hardware thing in place for credit card transactions. However, we were getting all the transactions as a customer payments whenever those were happening, and then uh, funding report for those were also being sent by POS to Dynamics. That way, we were clearing those from the bridging into the uh, bank account, and it really helped us take care of bank reconciliation in automated fashion. These funding reports made sure all the transactions for that one day, the way they were going to be funded in the bank for that given store, were getting transferred similarly into Dynamics. Okay. The next lane we are going to go into is both. This is where we try to keep very less in this, meaning we didn't want to make two directional integration or make two systems as a master. And that's where inventory on hand kind of sits in between here, because one side of on hand meaning cost side is Dynamics, while quantities was from POS. So that's why I say on hand was kind of sitting in middle, and there are things to make sure it is getting synchronized between both sides, and we don't really have any failures or uh, in the transactions, and then differences within the quantities on both sides. Okay. And transfer orders is another interesting one because transfer orders you can create two ways. You can have transfer order created as part of the sales order. For example, customer walks in and they are in the store here in Southern California, and they say, "Oh, I want this material," but they pick the material that is sitting in one of the Northern California distribution center or a store. Now, as part of that process, POS was creating the transfer order as well. So it was sending us the transfer order in that scenario, uh, along with the sales order. On other side, Dynamics was creating transfer orders for planning purposes. So for example, as part of our master planning process, uh, master planning was creating transfer orders from DC distribution center to the stores. So we had two different places where transfer orders were getting created. So whenever we had one created in POS, it was getting synced to Dynamics. And when there was one getting created from Dynamics, we were sending it to POS, because POS was the place where that transfer actually was happening, like shipping that from the DC and then receiving it into the store. All of that was happening from uh, point of sale or warehousing system. Let's get into the next lane, which is more for what was what is being mastered in Dynamics and then pushing it to POS. So one of the reason we're kind of spending time on this slide, this is really key when it comes to designing similar situations. It's Microsoft R&D has spent so much time and they've done it. And however, when you're by your own, making sure all of these kind of are aligned based on what you need is very important. We just had this as a thing on the one of the whiteboards pre-COVID, and then we have been using the PowerPoint version since then to make sure every interaction, whenever we are talking about integrations, we are looking at the simplified view. What is the master, which direction is going, and things like that. And there are just so many of them, right? So from master perspective, then all the customer products and things like that, store master, employee master, was in Dynamics, and we are sending it to BYOD. So it's going to BYOD for different reasons, including pushing it or synchronizing it with the POS. It's also being utilized. BYOD is also being utilized for Power BI. So we are using one place to achieve both the purposes. Then we have some of the real-time outbound services, which are really on demand call from POS. For example, POS wants to know there is a customer out there and they want to know how much is OpenAR sitting for this customer. They can send the request to Dynamics and pull the AR and then use it for accepting the payment from the customer, or uh, also uh, denying their order or looking at their account before they make the judgment. Then projects and purchase agreements and things like that were in Dynamics and were called real time from a POS. Then we get into the third category here on integration, where Dynamics is pushing the data uh, or getting the data from POS. So POS is calling Dynamics to push this into Dynamics. So now here it's more of a POS received the payment, customer made the payment in POS or website or whatever medium. That payment is getting pushed to Dynamics immediately, a real time, because then that does have impact on different aspects. Even if in some cases sales order may not be created, but if we receive the payment, like for example, sales order the may be in kind of quote status, which is not yet approved or assigned, we were still getting the payments just to make sure our bank reconciliation and other sides were working fine. Because at the end of the day, if you receive the payment, even if the sales order is not ready to be shipped, you still need to reconcile the bank to, and then for that you need to make sure payment is out there and recorded, and you want to make sure your financials are right. So we're we have done that as a from little bit from finance standpoint. We have treated those as a prepayments, and from customers perspective, their business is more into a lot of specialized products for which they put the deposit, get the deposit down from the customer, and then ship the product out. So if you were to order, it's not like everything is not cash and carry. There is a lot of heavy material involved, and that does need you to put the deposit down and then later take the delivery or schedule the delivery. And from that perspective, we are pushing these as prepayments into Dynamics and then applying those to the invoices once invoice is out there. Similarly, we're getting PO invoices, which are coming from EDI and settlements for the customers. Whenever say somebody comes in and says, hey, I want this credit to be applied to this invoice, and then I'll make the payment for other thing. So similar different scenarios we have for real time where POS calls the Dynamics. And the last one, just for on Dynamics side, this is again a small list, but there are a lot of other areas we are using in Dynamics. But these are in the context of POS, what Dynamics is being utilized. All the sales commissions and commission adjustments, or paying the vendor, inventory costing, master planning, general ledger, bank reconciliation, and then rebates for customers. So again, just to reiterate, we have tried to use power of Dynamics where there was lack of functionality on the other side. So for example, they didn't really have the functionality for rebates. Uh, However, rebates is a big part of commission calculation as well, because it does impact the profitability, right? So rebate calculation on real time basis as soon as order was shipped was really important for them. And we looked at what's there in Dynamics and utilized the rebates functionality there. After order gets invoiced, rebates immediately get calculated, and then it's available there in the reporting area. and we start accruing for the reboots. Okay. So this is more from functional standpoint, how things are, and there are definitely one can argue why one is on one side versus other side, but we at least wanted to make sure each of them have home, and uh, the home is a place where it's going to live, and not really do the two different places for mastering the data or keeping the data, because that gets challenging when you have bi-directional integration. Okay, keeping solution simple was really key thing. So the next one is this is where I'll hand it over to Saket to talk about the toolbox and selection of the tools. So Saket.
Yeah. Thanks, Yogesh. Thanks for the good information on what all integrations we had to build. So Dynamics 365 FNO out of the box comes with lots of technologies which can be implemented for performing an integration with a third party or any outside applications. Uh, what we had to do was looking at the requirement and seeing what is the need, whether it is a real time versus can it be delayed or can it be push notification or it is a pull notification and things like that. We had decided based on the requirement which technology will suit best for that side of a requirement. So the first and foremost which comes out of the box from Microsoft Dynamics is OData web service. So this is an OData web service provided by Microsoft, which applies with all the out-of-the-box entities provided by Microsoft, and Microsoft FNO comes out of the box about about hundreds of entities. They have published that one, and that can be utilized by anyone out of the box without any customization. The advantage of that OData using the OData web services are like it's a dual right side. You can utilize that in your POS application as you perform transaction in POS. You can perform the similar transaction in D365 as well using this one. It's a smaller footprint. It is mostly and highly recommended only for smaller data sets. Like if you are doing a mass upload of thousands of products, probably that is not recommended. But for smaller chunk um, smaller chunk like creation of a transfer order or creation of a journal and things like that, you can definitely utilize the OData. So looking at the capacity or capability of OData web services, for this implementation, we have mostly used it for getting the data from D365. So for getting the information of a purchase order, to get the information of a receipts list, what all is coming, like basically that's an ASN, advance ship notice, provided by the vendor. So those informations are stored in D365, but POS or POS slash warehouse management needs that data to receive those items in the warehouse. So that was the main purpose for getting those information from D365. And the other thing was transfer orders, because transfer orders are also, as Yogesh mentioned, they have multiple ways of a transfer order. One is auto-created transfer orders, which was generated from Dynamics platform. So that can be captured, or that can be, those information can be taken by POS application using the OData web service. So mainly like the smaller footprint where they don't need the mass data, or they don't need to perform like a complex multi-step process for achieving something. That's where we have utilized OData web services to get the out-of-the-box capability of Dynamics. The second, Yogesh, you can go to the next one. The second technology which they have is, again, it is in line with OData only, because OData underneath it is nothing but different entities, right? You can utilize those entities either via OData web services to consume it real time, or you can use the same entities to export those data out into your own database. So BYOD is nothing but bring your own database. Uh, Basically, what Dynamics provides is it provides you can dump out your flattened entities into your own database, which you can consume for your day-to-day thing. So and you can run this synchronization between your Dynamics and your own database based on your need. What we had done was for all the transactional aspect of the BYOD was run more frequently than your master data, which is mostly kept a constant. It may get modified, but it may not be needed to synchronize with your database that often. Uh, they use this BYOD technology for keeping the latest of the master data, like products, vendors, customer information. So all those information was captured in this BYOD, where they can grab those data directly from the database, which they can access and that's where they get more power, because now they have a SQL in their hand, and they can directly query it to get whatever they need. On top of that, that also helps a building of a Power BI dashboard, because Power BI can now get the data from this BYOD database, and they can build their own dashboard on top of it. So that's where BYOD was mostly utilized for master data housing for integration, and BYOD for transactional. So the next one is everybody's favorite, custom web services. So Dynamics does have an option of doing your own customization and create your own web services, which can be consumed by POS. So the advantage which you get with this is that you can perform multi task operation in one shot. Plus, you can utilize both standard AX, standard Dynamics functionality, and you can build your own functionality on top of it. So you can perform your own data validations, perform your own business validations before you transact inside AX, inside Dynamics, and which can be utilized both on an integration layer and on a UI layer of Dynamics. So for this implementation, we have chose this option only where we had a complex task, like a creation of a sales order. In general, creation of a sales order is not a complex, but it is complex in this scenario is because it is doing multiple steps. It is not only creating header and line and charges. They were also creating the payments, they were attaching the payments, they are creating the commissions. So all those things were and associating it with that sales representative, which can be more than one. So there are multiple step process which was happening with creation of a sales order. That's why we chose to go a custom web service route, where we can where we can get the information from POS that, hey, customer A has ordered this 5 things with this quantity, and all the other information of with it, like payments and things like that. The second thing which we also did was custom sales order invoicing. Again, in the sales order invoicing, invoicing is not the only action which normally happens. It does the registration, it does the packing slip creation, it does the sales order invoicing, it also does the invoice settlement with a payment, right? So that's the part on that one. And similarly, receiving of a purchase order. So again, in that one also, it is a complex logic where they do uh, 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 the PO receipt registration, and uh, then post the product receipt. They can also do the unregister as well. So that's where a custom web service was used. The next technology which we have is business events. So business event comes out of the box with Dynamics. and it is mostly being utilized for triggering or notifying to the third party. So there are a good amount of out of the box business events which Dynamics provides, like customer modification, purchase order confirmation, transfer order creation. So there were a good amount of out of the box business events which sends triggers to multiple or basically different endpoints. In our case, we used Azure queue to send those information into the queue, and POS fetches the data from the queue to consume as and when they need it. And the last technology which we had is Power Automate. So this is an excellent tool provided by Microsoft Stack. Power Automate or Flow, it integrates with multiple applications and can handle a lot of automated processes where you can integrate with Dynamics seamlessly and perform tasks on a regular basis with the outside world. So we have used this technology mainly for doing the bank statement import, where a bank statement is uploaded to a blob storage of in Azure. Once it receives over there, it automatically flows to Dynamics. Same thing is for Power BI. As soon as the BYOD gets populated with the latest data, it sends automatic trigger to ADF to run the automated job to build the Power BI dashboard or recalculate the information. So in nutshell, basically, like Dynamics provides lot of out of the box and lot of various ways of integration. It's just like based on our need, we need to decide which option fits best in our scenario. So
Thank you, Saket. Really great. And this is the area which really had the biggest impact in the success in terms of using the right tool for each of them. We had to make sure we are meeting the business requirement, and we are also making sure system is going to perform well. We didn't want to put too many real-time services which will create performance related challenges, and vice versa. We didn't want to just rely on too much on asynchronous, which would not have made the business requirements. So it was mix of so many different tools, and that's really the key with Dynamics 365. Like, there are so many different ways that are supported, and you really have rich toolbox with between Dynamics 365 and then power of Azure. Okay, now we'll get into the validation. Now we have, so we talked about the architecture, we got it built. Now how are we validating? So the biggest part of validation was like creating those test scripts and execution. We had around 1,000 test scripts, and I'm not kidding, we had almost 1,000 test scripts for just for the integration scenarios. And I'll give you the glimpse of it, but it was all about master data, different transactions. I changed the product, new product got created, migrated product, and then all kind of different transactions that can happen. We also looked at performance and load testing to make sure we can, once we go live, we will be able to perform the system will be able to handle the load. That's also one of the things Microsoft wants before you go live. Error handling and resolution is also key. Like, there will be errors, and how you handle those, like retry and not create the duplicate transactions and things like that. That was really key, because you don't want system to be creating bad data or create a lot of work for uh, technical team to fix the data. We really wanted to make sure there is a robust mechanism in place, and to deal with the errors as they happen. Now, on right hand side, I'll just show you the l- really high level view of all different types of sales orders we had to deal with. Like, customer pays the deposit, then customer pays the deposit, then customer picks from one store, returns to another store. There are multiple sales reps. I'm not going to read through all of them, but it gives you kind of glimpse of when I mean by 1,000 test cases, because you have to consider all different customer behaviors, like, and the system side as well. Like, we didn't migrate all the data into Dynamics for history, but we had to consider, oh, what if customer bought this product before we went on Dynamics? How is the return process going to work? What will happen if there was a price change for the product that was purchased before we moved to Dynamics? And in some cases, some of the stores went live fairly recently on POS. So we have to also consider what happens if that transaction original sales did not go through the POS and it went through the legacy ERP system directly before POS was even introduced to that store, and now we are having to do the return of that order. So, but thankfully, in this journey, now we'll talk about how we accomplish that performance and functional testing. Thankfully, the POS was already live and functional, so that really helped us in this journey, because then we were able to do the performance and functional testing for lot of different scenarios by going through this approach, like simulating day in life. We actually did months in life. Like, when we went live in June, but we had ran March, April, and good portion of May through this test environment. So we pulled the data from production POS, and uh, as if all of those transactions happen in POS, and now they're supposed to be going to Dynamics. So it's little challenging to do exact same test as if both were live at same time, but we were able to replicate that in fairly good fashion to at least achieve the goals of this testing. So went ahead and, like, say, we started with 1 month at a time and loaded that into Sandbox on dynamic side. Like, for example, we loaded the payments and loaded the funding reports. That helped us match it to the bank statement, and it was true end to end to make sure numbers are tying. When we were able to match it with the bank statement accurately, that that confirmed that data is flowing throughout the process correctly, and we don't have anything that is missed from the bank statement or any other perspective. Sales order, and of course it didn't like just work in first go. We had to take like iterative approach, but it helped us identify those issues in testing than doing it or finding those out after we went live, because cost of finding those errors after go live is a lot. You're now talking about fixing so many transactions and code, and then it just not easy scenario to deal with. Same thing we did with the sales orders and returns. We loaded the month worth of, say, all the sales orders and then returns, and um, looked at how those will get processed. We found quite a few interesting things in this area. We'll talk about those when we get into that key learning slide. Uh, Purchase orders, as Saket mentioned, we had quite few interesting scenarios because of the way the products are serialized, catch weight, and then products may have different weight or different sizes for each serial number and things like that. So, and then it gets received and then cross dock and then gets shipped to another warehouse from DC as part of that process. And uh, sometimes after receiving, part of it gets canceled. So all those different things we were able to kind of simulate, and actually some of those we learned during this process, like, hey, this transaction didn't go through, so why it didn't go through, what is different, and then we learn, oh, we missed this scenario, and we added it to our list of scenarios and got that fixed. So inventory transactions, we looked at different performance issues and tweaks tied to this because of like volume. I mentioned earlier, like bank reconciliation, this was a very important item from dollar standpoint. Like we needed to make sure dollars are matching, because when you think about retail, there are just so many transactions. There may be low dollar amount but high volume, and if you don't have this right, this can really screw you up, because the reconciliation will be a big nightmare. Then because of having all this data now, sales orders, invoices and stuff, we were able to take it to the next level, and look at it in Power BI and see how are our commissions getting calculated and how are our margins looking for that month, which we did. So now we are able to also verify whether our Power BI reports are right. Are those calculating the commissions correctly? So we compared those commission number and then margin numbers with the other legacy ERP. Of course, there were differences, and as far as we were able to justify why there were differences, because inventory cost was different, and the logic for commissions had changed a little bit. But the key thing was we were able to identify quite few issues that were obvious in that. Like if margin is supposed to be say 50% on certain product, and we are seeing it way extraordinary or way less, then that is good sign that you need to investigate and find what's wrong. And in some cases it was issue with all the way back to data migration, tied to the way we migrated the inventory cost. Like we found in this process, we found that some of the inventory on hand that was getting migrated was wrong, because we were using uh, total cost for that lot as a per unit cost during migration by mistake. But it was really good find before going live. Otherwise, it would have definitely had a lot worse impact. Then invoice copies. This was another interesting one. So we pulled the invoice copies, like what went to the customer, and we pulled it from production, and then validated that we had AR team signed up to just look at different customers and invoices, and we found some of the fields were not getting migrated. For example, customer PO number or job number, or in some cases bill to ship to was not coming along or stuff like that. And uh, we found quite a few things that we were able to fix with the invoices. Again, if you see the theme, it was all about how do we protect the external facing things, like and dollar amounts, right? Uh, Invoices, once you send it out, it's already gone. And if you have issue with the invoices in current time, that's the last excuse you want to give it to the customer for not paying the invoice on time, right? That, hey, your invoice was wrong, so I sat on it till due date, and now I'm asking you to resend me the new one, and now I'm going to start my aging again. And I don't think CFO would be happy to hear that in current economic situation we are in. So we spent a lot of time verifying invoices for their accuracy as part of this process. Errors in integration, and then things that were failing to post and dealing with those failures and stuff like that. We made sure our processes were good. And as I mentioned earlier, there were quite few scenarios. Just as example, they had like freight only refund, like customer comes in and then buys something, and then they go away and then comes back, hey, you charged me a lot more freight than, and we never talk about the freight, and now somebody's trying to give them refund for the freight. In Dynamics, there is no way to just do the miscellaneous charge invoice or credit note. So we had to come up with the some ways to deal with that. Same thing for returns for pre-POS invoices, which we talked about. Okay. So again, this is like talking about all the testing we did in like one slide, but I think it gives the some background on what it took. So now we'll talk about some of the key learnings. I'm sure we learned this along the project, and thankfully before going live. But if somebody else is in same boat and trying to do it, I'll definitely make sure you look at this. Uh, for example, invoice posting, there are always rounding differences, right? So you need to make sure you're not letting those get posted. Like for example, we have code in place where we get the invoice total from POS when as part of sales order invoice service in Dynamics, we make sure the totals are matching. And if it doesn't match, then we don't post the invoice. We just say failed because numbers don't match. And because once invoice gets posted, now it's a lot more painful to fix it because invoice number is already used and now you can't really fix it easily. So we made sure amounts and then inventory quantity. Inventory quantity is a little bit tricky when you have multiple units of measure, like you have quantities in different units like pieces and square feet, and then different systems are talking about different unit of measure. So that's really the thing we verified as part of that to make sure unit conversion and those were dealt with from rounding perspective, same way between both sides. And retaining keys between both the system is very critical. It saved us big time. This is very basic principle when it comes to architecture, but sometimes it gets overlooked. For example, when there is a invoice number in the POS, we made sure that invoice number gets saved. And when same thing when customer payment gets posted sent from from POS to Dynamics, we're making sure that voucher number was passed back so that there is a key between both sides to track what's happening with this transaction, and it helps us deal with the errors and avoid duplicates and so many different things. And uh, we we had quite few exception reports that were created to find what is not matching, and those keys were really helpful in those regard. Uh, we had come up with the validation process for inventory differences like Power BI. We utilize our BYODW and uh, Power BI to verify where the differences are coming and uh, dealt with those and came up with the process to deal with those. Error handling, as we talked about, that's definitely key. Testing a day in life, which we talked about in previous slide, that is absolutely important when you go through that this kind of implementation. And I'm again saying we did this because customer already had POS investment, so they already had the POS log. So that means we were able to use the data from POS system to simulate day in life. And availability of reports and exceptions reporting to identify these issues during the testing was really helpful. Okay, with that, I have few minutes left for Q&A. Just we kind of covered a lot of different slides, more concepts and architecture and things. Unlike a lot of other previous presentation, there was a lot of stuff that was shown related to product, but if you want to see some more from product standpoint, how these integrations work, we can definitely follow up on that later. Okay, any questions?
Fantastic. Thanks. For like a really good another session with a lot of information to digest. Just looking into chat window, we haven't got any question, Yogesh. So looks like we can actually move into Q&A session. And before we go there, just wanted to inform everyone that I have created a Microsoft form where I would recommend everyone to submit